On December 9, 2012, Stewart Butterfield shut down a video game. The first time he had done this, in 2002, the game was called Game Never Ending, an online RPG that never found its audience. When it failed, a small photo-sharing feature buried inside it became Flickr, sold to Yahoo for roughly $25 million in 2005. Now here he was again. 4 years of work, hundreds of thousands of players, a world built on the imaginations of 11 sleeping giants. Gone. Sec. The internal tool his team had built to communicate while building Glitch, that thing was still running. Sec. Tiny Speck, the company that had built Glitch, went to its investors with a proposal. Instead of returning the remaining capital and shutting down, use the remaining runway to turn the internal communication tool into a commercial product. The proposal was not met with enthusiasm. The founding team was the same: Butterfield, Cal Henderson, Eric Costello, Sergei Murashov. No new hires, no pivot announcement, just 4 people who had just watched their game die, turning to a tool they had already built for themselves. Ezeki. The pitch for what would become Slack, a workplace messaging platform, required investors to believe that enterprise software was a category where a team that had just failed at a consumer video game could succeed. Enterprise software was not what the team had been hired and funded to build. The communication tool had been built as infrastructure to support game development, not as a primary product, and the enterprise software market was, in 2012 and 2013, not the obvious opportunity it would later become. It was a market dominated by established players with deep sales relationships and significant switching costs. The investors who kept Tiny Speck funded through the pivot were not doing so because the pivot was obviously correct. They were doing so because the team had demonstrated something more specific: the ability to recognize what they had built and the willingness to abandon what they had been building in favor of it. By August 2013, Slack entered private beta. The team ran a coordinated soft launch. They invited a handful of companies to try the tool simultaneously and report back. On the first day of the invitation-only beta, 8,000 people signed up. The servers strained. SEC. The 8,000 companies that signed up on the first day of the beta were not responding to a product launch. They were responding to a solution to a problem they had been experiencing and had no good existing answer for. The enterprise communication landscape in 2013 was dominated by email, which was asynchronous, unorganized, and created communication silos, and by a collection of older tools like IRC and Microsoft Communicator that were technically capable but not designed for the kind of real-time, searchable, channel-organized communication that distributed teams needed. Slack's internal messaging system was an always-on, searchable, real-time chat tool that became the digital heartbeat of their remote team. It wasn't a product. It was plumbing. Email felt slow. IRC was outdated, so they built their own communication system. WildNet Technologies. The specific features that made Slack work, the channel organization, the searchability, the integration with other tools, had been developed by a team building them for their own use. They had been built to solve a specific problem that the Tiny Speck team had, working distributed across multiple cities on a complex creative project. The specificity of that problem and the directness of the solution the team built for it is what made Slack different from the enterprise communication tools that had been built by teams without that specific problem. The public launch came in February 2014. On day 1, approximately 15,000 daily active users. By August 2014, 171,000 daily active users. By November 2014, 285,000 daily active users. By February 2015, over 500,000 daily active users. SEC, have you ever watched a product grow through word of mouth at a pace that no marketing budget could have produced, because the product was solving a problem that people had and that nothing else was solving as well? Leave a comment. The investor dynamics around Slack's pivot are instructive in a specific way that the growth narrative tends to obscure. Accel owned a 24% stake, worth roughly $1.8 billion at the time of Slack's IPO listing. The company raised a monstrous $1.22 billion in equity funding from backers including Accel, A16Z, Social Capital, SoftBank, T. Rowe Price, IVP, and Kleiner Perkins, SEC. But the funding that made Slack possible was not the later round funding from the investors who participated after the product's success was already visible. The funding that made Slack possible was the earlier funding, the capital that kept TinySpec operating through the glitch shutdown and the pivot period. TechCrunch coverage at the time of the glitch shutdown noted that while the game was ending, TinySpec had developed some unique messaging technology with applications outside of the gaming world. Accel's Andrew Braccia said of Butterfield, "He could have continued, but he thought given our ambitions and the time and place where we are today, let's end it now and move on." Lenos. The investors who stayed with TinySpec through the glitch failure were not funding Slack. They were funding Butterfield's judgment, specifically his judgment that the messaging tool was more valuable than the game, and his willingness to act on that judgment by shutting down the game rather than trying to save it. That's a different bet than funding Slack. It's a bet on a founder's capacity for accurate self-assessment and decisive action under conditions of failure. It's a harder bet to make and a harder bet to evaluate. The investors who made it generated returns that most enterprise software investments don't produce. If the specific mechanism, how the willingness to abandon a failing primary product in favor of a successful secondary tool requires a specific combination of accurate self-assessment and decisiveness that most organizations don't have, is what makes this channel worth your time. The like is the direct signal. Slack was later acquired by Salesforce for $27.7 billion in 2021. SEC. The employees of TinySpec who had been working on Glitch, the engineers, the designers, the community managers, were not in a straightforward position when the game shut down. They had built something they believed in. The game had been beloved by its small community. The shutdown was experienced as a loss. Glitch's community grieved its shutdown so deeply they built 3 open-source successors from its Creative Commons licensed assets. The team released the entire codebase and art library to the public when it closed. SEC. What came after the shutdown for the core team was a pivot that required them to stop thinking about the thing they had been building and start thinking about the thing they had built in order to build it. The communication tool had been infrastructure, the plumbing of the creative process. Turning it into the product required a specific shift in perspective that not all of the Glitch team was positioned to make. Some of the Glitch team moved with the pivot, some did not. The company that became Slack was smaller than the company that had been building Glitch. The growth that followed the pivot did not immediately restore the team to its former size. The people who had worked on the game they believed in were, for a period, working on a business communication tool, which was not what they had signed up for. The trajectory from Glitch's shutdown to Slack's acquisition by Salesforce for $27.7 billion is, in retrospect, one of the cleanest examples of a failed product becoming the foundation of a successful company. In real time, it was a group of people navigating a failure, finding something in the wreckage, and building it into something that nobody, including them, had planned for. Butterfield has been asked whether he knew what he was doing when Glitch failed, whether he recognized the flicker from game never-ending template being repeated. His answers have been characteristically self-deprecating. The official story is accidental genius. The actual record suggests something more, a founder who has now twice built the exact right product for himself and his team while trying to build something else, and who had the honesty and speed to recognize what he had built when it was time to pivot. SEC. The practical lesson from the Slack origin story is not build tools for yourself. That advice is too general to be actionable. The specific lesson is when a project produces, as a byproduct, a tool that the team itself cannot stop using, a tool that has become more indispensable than the project it was built to support. The question worth asking is not, how do we save the project? It is, what is the tool telling us about the problem that actually needs to be solved? The game was the primary product. The communication tool was the secondary product. The secondary product was the one the team couldn't function without. The primary product was the one that failed. Those two facts, read together, told the story that Butterfield and his team were willing to act on. Most organizations in the same situation continue investing in the primary product because that's what they were funded to build, while the secondary tool remains an internal curiosity. The secondary tool, unnoticed, is often the most direct evidence available about what the organization's actual capabilities are and what problem those capabilities are best positioned to solve. The next episode looks at a case where a rejected idea, dismissed by the organization it was proposed to, became the category standard when the proposer took it elsewhere. This content was developed with the support of artificial intelligence tools and underwent human review, editorial curation, and approval before publication. The analysis presented here is strictly educational and philosophical in nature, grounded in behavioral psychology and classical stoicism.